All right, so today we're going to talk about getting started on your mini projects. You guys will start these next week, but this will kind of serve as a video that you can go back and reference to make sure you got all the pieces and parts. So when you do a new project or lab or code, you really don't want to create that to start off with in PyCharm. You can do it that way, but a lot of students have run into issues if they do that. So I strongly suggest that you don't create it in PyCharm, that we actually create it out on GitHub first. So to do that, you go out to GitHub, you log into your GitHub account, and up here in the upper left-hand corner under repositories, you have the ability to set a new repository. So we'll click on new, and then here in the repository name, this needs to be whatever the project is going through. So back out here on GitHub, I'm going to have a section here under learning modules, and then you'll have this GitHub etiquette stuff. At the top is going to be the project name, and you want to make sure you use the full project name that's here. So it should be Miniproject 1 and then your full name at the end. We've tried initials, we've tried that kind of stuff. It does not work because too many students in the same class had the same initials. So please go ahead and use your full name as you go all the way across here. So for like this example, I obviously don't want to call it this because we have that upcoming. So we'll call it example project for the purposes of this. And if all goes well, you should have this URL available down here at the bottom. All right. In the description, we don't really need to put anything in here in terms of what GitHub needs. We'll talk about our description being in the README file here in a little bit. Every homework assignment, you will want to list it as public going out there. Again, the goal of these homework assignments is that you can start to build a portfolio so that if you are to go get a job, you can show them that this is your coding examples in Python. And trust me, when I was out in industry, this is how we hired people. The first thing we asked before we really looked into their resume was show us your code on GitHub. And if they didn't have anything that told us, they probably weren't as serious, or they were scared of showing people their code, which means they probably didn't comment. They probably didn't do all sorts of things. And obviously we couldn't have that in industry. We needed to be able to see people's code. You needed to be able to share code, and it needed to be well documented so that if you were to leave, that the code can continue on. So make sure we have private, or I'm sorry, public set here. This next section here, initialize the repository with a README. Go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and let it auto create a README file. At the get ignore, this is important. We actually want to add this one too. So for the get ignore template, we're going to scroll down here and choose Python. There we go. And then for the license, you don't have to set a license, but it's good habit to do so. So in the choose a license, you could choose this down and then you could set it to whatever license there is. It's important to note when you're building out code that there is a lot of different licenses that you can license your code under. Each one of them does a different way or a different way of, what they can and can't do with your code. So if you go out and look at this, learn more about licensing, then you can come out here and read a little bit more as to what each of these licenses are. Typically, the ones that we're really caring about in here is you could either do like a GNU3 or an MIT license, which pretty much gives them full rights to do whatever you want with your code. All right. If you want to license it under something else, that's fine. Doesn't matter. Or you can leave it none. Again, does not matter in there. All right. So we have that going. We can go ahead and click on create repository. And if all goes well, you should have two files in this new repository. So out here on GitHub, you have your URL here at the top. If we look up in the URL bar and we click on that, that is the URL that we need to copy for like homework assignments, etc. So if I was to copy this URL out and say I was in, let's just go down here to what it would look like in the first week for Miniproject 1. We'd go to week 4. And then I'd have Miniproject 1. When I go to submit, all I'm going to do is hit create submission, and I'm going to copy and paste that URL in just like that. It shouldn't have any extra stuff on it. It should just say github.com, whatever your username is, and then the repository name right after that. Then I click submit, and that's all you have to do. All right. You're not uploading files. You're not doing anything else on Blackboard for projects. You're just submitting me the URL in order to go pull that. Okay. On this screen, we're going to see the actual files that are a part of your GitHub repository. So Git in and of itself, and there's some good videos I think I posted out there on what Git is. Git is a way to do versioning of your code, and there's a couple different ones out there that are popular. You have Git, you have Mercurial used to be a big one. SVN or Subversion used to be one. Most days or most people today use GitHub. And the beauty of Git is it allows you to have multiple people working on the code in the same time, just working off different tags that are running through there or branches, depending on what you're doing. So you can do feature branches on code. So if you're out in the real world, it's really handy to use something like Git in order to have multiple people working on the same code train all at once and still being able to accomplish it without interfering with one another. This is what we used out in industry when we were building different coded projects, whether it was Python or C++ or whatever we were coding in, everything kind of runs through Git. You have GitHub, which is a free repository out there that you can also have public things, which is what we're doing in this class. You also have the ability to do private repositories in there. So if you don't want to share that code with anybody, you now have that option to do a private repository on github.com. If you are a company, you're probably not wanting to post any of this out there, right? Because it's licensed content. You may not necessarily want to post it on GitHub. So you would use a local Git repository, and a lot of times that is something like GitLab, which operates exactly like GitHub. Only the idea is that you run your local GitHub site like server locally, and so you have things like GitLab, and of course it has its own pricing and things like that in order for you to stand your system up and go. Works really, really well though. Okay. So now down here, you're going to see what branch you're on. So there's lots of different branches that you can use within your code. The main ones that we're worried about is main, right? In the labs and stuff like that, I may mention the word master for those. So let me see. I think I do that on one of these. I need to go back and fix those. So I'll make sure I fix that this semester. The main branch is called main now. It used to be the master branch. Due to some politics and things like that, they changed it from the word master over to main. So I need to go up and upload some documentation. That's one of the reasons that if you try to create this out here in PyCharm by default still goes to master, which will cause some issues when you come back and try to do it on GitHub. So it's always preferable that you create your repository out here on GitHub first. Right? You can create a second branch. So if you have a bunch of working code, that could be your main branch. And then you could have like a dev branch, which is where you use your main code branch, but you are changing some things, but you don't affect the main branch. For this class, we're not going to get that fancy and sophisticated. We're really just worried about the main branch. All right. Beyond that, you're going to be able to see your code. If you wanted to pull it down, and one thing that you'll need is this link here. This link here is going to allow you to pull it down in PyCharm, which we'll go through as well. We'll come back to that. Out here in the middle are your files, all right? And anything that has a period in it means that it is usually a configuration file of some sort. It's usually ignored. In this case, we have what's called a git ignore file. And if we click on this file, what that's going to show us is all the different files that it's going to ignore and not commit to your repository. Why would we want that? Well, when you're working with Python, it's going to have a bunch of little mini cache files or maybe some environment variables or something like that, in which case like our API code, our API keys, we don't want to submit that ever to our GitHub repository. So this git ignore is going to ignore any specific file types that we don't want it to allow. This will be good when we modify that here in a little bit for PyCharm, because PyCharm has a bunch of extra files that are out there, your configuration settings, etc. We do not want it to upload that to your GitHub repository. The second one here is the README file. The README file is in a language called Markdown. And so if you look in this week's section, let me pull that back up here, and I'll probably move this into the GitHub etiquette folder. But if we go in here, you will see a link here. There's the README documentation. I'm pretty sure I moved that for you. Okay, that's the template. So I'll get the documentation link over here, but for now I'll just pull it up. It will be in the main GitHub etiquette there. Okay. So what this is how you will write the instructions for somebody to download your project, how to give them all the information they need in order to edit, execute your project as it's running. So this all runs in what's called Markdown, and you have a GitHub flavor, which means that GitHub has its own syntax styling as to how you should lay that out. So all headings are going to use a hashtag first. This does not comment it out like what we're used to in Python. This gives you a level 1 heading, which is this bigger, bolder heading. 2 hashtags puts it on a second level. 3 hashtags gives you a third level. And then there's all these other different stylings. So if you want to bold something, you put double asterisks around it, and that ends up bolding the text. You will kind of want to keep this as a cheat sheet as you are building out your README files. So this is something you can bookmark, reference back, how to add images, all sorts of stuff in here. I gave you in this learning modules and down here in GitHub etiquette, under this README template, this is the template that you'll follow for this class. This may edit or change as we go through it, and I'll show you how to use that here in just a second. All right. So right now, all we have in it, if we actually looked at the code, we click on this MD file, and we look at the code itself, you'll notice it's just a hashtag with the name of our project file. When we look at that, it's just a really bolded one over top. So, and that automatically shows up down here at the bottom. So if we look at other repositories or what somebody else may have, if we go back and look at some of my other ones here, here's an example of one out in industry. A README file is going to give them instructions as to a summary of what the project is, some kind of introduction, license, how to install everything, and all the install instructions. Note that all these install instructions are in a nice, you can copy and paste it. It's kind of in a console window here. We'll show you how to do that code. And then like this usage, in this case, they tell you what command to run, which you guys will do as well. They put a GIF in here that is just, it's a GIF that shows you what it would look like once you execute the command. You guys don't have to go that far. But this is just an example of what a README would look like. And a bunch of people do it in different ways, but there's a standard format, and that's kind of what we did over here with this template, at least what we're going to need for this class. All right, so let's get this pulled down into PyCharm so we can start working with it. When you come up and load PyCharm, if you're already in another project, just go to File, Close Project, and it will take you up to this welcome screen. From here, we're going to click on Get VCS, VCS standing for Get Version Control System, and then we need a URL. So if we come back out here to our project, scroll up, let's go back to mine. Come on, take me back to my repo. And we should have example project. Here we go. Okay. You will click on code, and then you will click on this HTTPS. You'll just hit copy to your clipboard. All right. Once you copied it to your clipboard, you come in here and you paste it in. All right. Notice this ends in a .git. If you tried to use this URL up above, it probably won't work. It's best if you go grab the .git one. All right. Or you can type .git at the back, either way. So we're going to go ahead and clone that. And what that does is it clones this repository to my local system. All right. As I make changes on my local system, I have to commit those changes to my local repository, and then I have to push those changes up to the public server, which is GitHub in this case. All right. If you need a better explanation of all that, there's a great video that I posted out here. I believe it's in that first week. Make sure where it's at here. Yes, how Git actually works. So again, I encourage you to watch this little short YouTube video. It explains how Git works and how you will be using it in terms of your own productions in this class. All right, so let's pull up our GitHub project, and you should see something like this. All right. Now, when you check out from GitHub over here on the left-hand side, you have those files. And so this is your file browser in the PyCharm window. And I showed a little bit of this in the PyCharm overview. The only files we have are the git ignore, and we have a README file. And here we are seeing what it looks like when that README file is not the code, but the actual preview example. If we look at this in the upper right here, you have the option to look at the editor side, which shows you what the underlying code would look like. Notice we got a single hashtag and the code. You also have a side-by-side, and I encourage you to use this side-by-side view. This allows you to type it over here, and you can watch it automatically change on the right. That way you know what it looks like when it's presented to the user. If we come into this README file and we go to our GitHub etiquette section here, and you guys won't see this right now and during this video, but I will turn it on here right after this. So let's see, we'll copy and paste all of this line of code out, which is just an example. Come into our PyCharm, Control A and Control V. Okay. So you'll notice over here on the right that it keeps it in a nice clean format in order for us to get started. So these three hashtags at the beginning, this is usually what you put. It's going to put this up here in major headers. Obviously, make sure you change the name accordingly. And then your project title here, this is something where you could essentially leave this part out because we don't need this chunk. We already have the title in the one up above. Okay. Your description, you want just a basic description of what you're doing in this project. All right. And then in the getting started section, we have a dependencies section. This is where you're going to have your pip install instructions. And again, I'm going to modify this template. We'll kind of add those in after next week when we get started on Miniproject 1. I'll show you how to do that, where here it shows you how to do code. Notice it uses 3 tick marks. Those tick marks are going to be usually on the key right before the number 1 on your keyboard, right? You got the tilde. You also have the tick marks. So 3 tick marks, whatever code you want, 3 more tick marks gives you this nice code that somebody can copy and paste out and paste into their environment or whatever else they need to do. Or if they're executing a command, they can copy that out. So for example, if we needed to say pip install web browser for whatever reason, right? We would put that in here, and on dependencies, we would just call this pip. It's right here, pip. I got caps lock on. Something like this. And then down here, we would go ahead and just copy this just to give us our template. And then inside our code block, we'd have something like pip install web browser. Okay. And then that tells you one of the steps you got to do is pip install web browser, and then we can go on down below. So this installing section, we can, again, this template's going to kind of modify as we go through this semester. In the past, I just kind of let students do whatever, and that turned out to be a little bit of a mistake because we got all sorts of stuff in there. So we'll kind of modify this template to see what fits us. And then once we get a final one by Miniproject 2, you guys can just go back and constantly reference this template. But this is how this works. It gets you these different blocks and sections. Authors, obviously, you just need to put your name down here in the authors section. Version history, if you want to be detailed, you could put this in here. I'm not going to make it a requirement of the class. The license is just telling them what license file is here. Again, you don't necessarily need this license and acknowledgements down at the bottom. Now, acknowledgements you will want if you guys are using any outside code, anything like that, please put a link to it here. All right. This is the equivalent of you writing a paper in college and citing your source. All right. So if you guys go find some code, even if you didn't use the code snippet, but it inspired you or gave you some information on how to do it, just very quickly, you build out a link like this. So this is going to be the section they see in the README. This is the underlying URL that it takes you to. And you can see how that looks over here on the right-hand side, right? So if I ask you guys to use an API to for this particular assignment, you would just give me a link out to that API. So if it was off Rapid API, just give me the link directly to it and then put the name of whatever that API is here so that when I click on it, I can go get a key and then I can start executing your code. All right. I'll pause here. Does anybody have any questions so far over GitHub and getting through the README side? Okay. So once we understand a little bit about the README, and a lot of times this is the very last thing you'll do before you submit your project. All right. So you tend to wait on the README because you don't know what files, everything you're going to install or what's all part of it until the very end, and you have it up and running. So it's one of the last documentation steps. All right. If we close that out, let's look at our git ignore. And you'll notice in this git ignore that you have here, this is a Python one. Down here at the very bottom, it's saying PyCharm, right? We want to make sure we ignore this .idea file. So we want to come back and take out that hashtag. This .idea / should be in green. That tells us that it's enabled. And what that's going to do is not submit all of your PyCharm settings for your project. We don't want that out there on the repo. If I check it out, I don't want you overwriting my settings, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure on your git ignore template, you come in here, you just simply uncomment out that last line so it's green and you're good to go. Now you'll notice over here on the left, these files turn blue. And what blue means is that there was changes made to this file that is not committed to the repository. If it is not blue, say it's gray, then over here, you'll notice it's just white, and that means that nothing has changed on that file from the repository. All right. So we're going to change that back. You'll notice it goes blue, and that means that we need to make sure we commit these changes out to our repository, which we will then push out to GitHub. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that part now, just to push out these changes to these two. So you'll go up here to the Git tab at the top, or the Git menu rather, and then from there, you're going to go to commit. Okay. Inside this commit window, you're going to see that it pulled the two files that had changes. You're going to have a section here for the commit message. You always have to have some kind of message here. So this would be something like updated.git ignore for PyCharm and updated readme.md for class, something like that. And then you always want to do these commits, and I'll explain this as we go further on, but the more you commit, the better. So anytime you do a simple change and something works, immediately commit that so that you can always revert back to those options. That's the whole point of a versioning control system, is the more commits you do, the more increments that you can back up if something isn't going the way you want it to. This prevents you from doing something like in INF601. You might have had 4 files, version 1, version 2, version 3. That's horrible because you can't maintain the code between those. That's the whole point of something like Git, is you have a version control system. But it only works if you actually do lots of little small commits. So if you look at, say, for example, a homework assignment, let's go back and look at the first one. And let's do week 4. You'll notice if we look at the points, you get 10 points for having a minimum of 5 commits. Why? Because I want you to be in the habit of making sure that you have multiple commits on your projects. That doesn't mean just give me 5 minimal commits in there, right? You should have 25, 30, 40, 50 commits in there. It doesn't matter how many. The goal is that you're committing often. And that allows you to revert back if you accidentally backed out of something, or maybe you changed a file and you didn't mean to, whatever it is, you can back out of that. Okay. So inside here, we've got our commit message, and down at the bottom, it's real handy because it will show you what it was before on the left and what changes you made on the right. And so this is a quick way to make sure that you didn't do any extra changes that you didn't anticipate on that file. So for here on the git ignore file, it was one simple change. On the README file, you're going to see all sorts of changes over here because we added that entire line. Okay. All right. Up here in the upper right, you don't need to necessarily click or change anything on this side, so you can leave that alone. We do want to always click this down arrow on commit, and we want to make sure we choose git, commit, and push. And what this does is it commits to our local repository and then pushes it on up to GitHub all in one stroke. That way we don't have to remember to go back and do it separately. So if we choose commit and push, it's going to commit it down here in the local repository, and then we want to push it out to the server. And we just want to click push on that side. and you'll see pushing down here in the lower right. All right, it looks like pushed one commit to origin. So now if we come back out here and look at our GitHub project and we refresh this screen, you'll notice that it has all of our README changes now to the README file. And that if we go out here to the git ignore, at the very bottom, you should see that it has the .idea unhashtag there so that it's actually working. All right. So this is how you would commit and push things up. You can also see that we have 2 commits, and every commit has a unique UID associated with it. So if we click on that UID here, we can see that this one is going out to this particular stance. This is how we can revert back changes later on if we absolutely needed to. We can go back and look at all the different commits and see which one we want to go back to. All right. Let's see. Let's go back down here to our project. So every time we go to a project, the first thing you want to check before you actually do any Python code is look down here at the bottom, and you'll notice mine says Python 3.9. It is using my local Python 3.9 interpreter on my machine. We want to make sure that we always have an interpreter or a virtual environment that is just for our project. And if you remember last week when I was doing an example of an API, we automatically had the virtual environment created for us. Well, when we check out code from GitHub, that does not exist. We have to create that. So if we click on this Python 3.9, and down here we want to click on Add New Interpreter, and then we want to click on Add Local Interpreter. All right. This pop-up should come up. If it does not for some reason, and I've ran into some instances that it just refused to pop up here, you can go to File and then Settings. And inside Settings, you can come over here on the left-hand side and go under your project and click on Python Interpreter. And then you can click on Add Interpreter, Add Local Interpreter, and it takes you to the same window. So if for some reason this local shortcut down here at the bottom doesn't work, then you can always go through in the settings way and do the same thing. So let's add a local interpreter. We want to make sure that in this base interpreter, we want to make that off of Python 3.12, unless you have a reason to run an older version, in which case you need to make sure you tell me that in your README. So sometimes if you're using really old packages or something, they may require that you use 3.9, 3.10, maybe even an old version like 3.1. I hope not, but hopefully it can still be ran on the latest. If it is a specific version, you got to tell us in the README so I can make sure I'm using the right interpreter. We're going to choose 3.12 for now, and we don't change anything else on this screen. We would just want to make sure it's new. It's going to automatically call it VNV. That's fine. And we can go ahead and hit OK. Before I do that, I want to show you something. If you pull up the terminal here, notice when I'm on the terminal, I see a PS over here. That tells me I do not have a virtual environment set up correctly. All right. I should see the words VENV. If I don't see that, I know I need to immediately make sure that I check my interpreter. So don't install packages or anything else until you get this interpreter set up. So this is all set up. Let's go ahead and hit OK. It will say creating a new virtual environment. This will usually take a little bit because it's essentially making a copy of Python on your machine specifically for this project. And we'll watch down here in the lower left, and it's going to build out those binary modules and skeletons. And once it's all done, we should get a little pop-up that tells us it's ready to go. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But you'll notice over here, I now have Python 3.12, but my project name is back here in parentheses. That means we're on the right one. So because I already had this terminal up, we go ahead and close this terminal. And if I reopen it up here, notice how it says VENV over here. If it has that, then we're fine. We're good to go. We're in the proper terminal, right? You can also look at my Python packages now, and we'll look under installed. Notice there's nothing installed. There's no packages installed whatsoever. If you see a bunch of packages listed here, you're probably using the wrong Python interpreter. That's kind of the number one thing that students mess up when they're first getting used to this. So that's the reason I'm spending so much time on it. All right. If we wanted to add a package, for example, we said we were going to use web browser, you could come in here and search for it and install it, or you could come down to the terminal and you could do pip install web browser. All right. It will grab those packages. That one's actually built in, if I remember right. So let's do something like pip install Wi-Finance. That'll be one of the first ones that we'll use in our mini project one. So it's going to go out and grab that project. And notice that it's going to install a bunch of other dependencies that are required for that. And we'll kind of talk about and show that here in just a little bit. Anybody have any questions up to this point? It's okay if you do, because somebody will. All right, so we'll get these packages installed here. And this is the part that will take me, the reason why it takes me a little bit to grade your homework assignments. So every time I check out one of your guys' assignments, I have to go back through, do a new version of Python, and then pip install all the packages required for your project. As you can see here, that takes a little bit of time. So I try to get the homeworks back as timely as possible, but it just takes time to grade every single one, depending on how many packages I got to install for your particular setup. So it looks like we're getting NumPy and some of the other ones we're going to talk about, some pandas. And what we're going to end up doing is realizing that we have all these packages installed. So if we look across here, we installed web encodings and PTZ and PWE and multitasking, a lot more than just installing Wi-Finance, right? There's a whole bunch of packages that were required for the Wi-Finance package. Well, each one of those is at their own version. And sometimes if we update a version of this, we break the entire code going all the way down. So it's important that we don't tell people to install Wi-Finance, that they actually need to use the very specific versions that you used during your actual project. All right. So if you remember in my README, let's pull that back up here. And we scroll up to that pip install web browser. We would never want to tell them to install a package directly. All right. What we want them to do is install what's called a requirements file. And that requirements file is a list of all the packages required for your project at a very specific version, and it has to install them at those versions. So to do that, we change this from pip install web browser to something like -r requirements .text. Okay. That means that there will be a requirements file up here that has a list of all those packages and their required version in order to generate that. All right. There's a lot of packages installed here. So notice how we're finally done installing. If we go to Python packages, it installed a lot of packages down here and it tells you what specific version they're on. You do not have to build this requirements file by hand. As a matter of fact, please don't do that. What you do is you come out here to the terminal and you type pip freeze. And what pip freeze does is it will list all of those packages and what versions they're at. And it's in a very specific format, right? Again, we don't want to copy and paste all this. We can actually force this to go to a file. So we do pip freeze greater than requirements dot text. And what this means is we're going to take this output of pip freeze and we're going to send it to a file called requirements.txt, right? So if we hit enter, it will run the same thing, only you'll notice this time it goes back to the prompt and we should have a requirements.txt up here in the upper left. Notice that that file is red. What that means is a new file was created, but it is not set to be added to our repository. So we're not trying to commit that file. We do want to do that. So if we right click on that file and come down here to Git, and we go to commit file, and that tells us that we want to add that to our repository. All right. We can click on this get requirements, and then we can change our commit package and do all that. I'm going to just ignore that for this time being. Instead of telling it to commit that file, I'll show you how that looks like here in a little bit. But if we open that, you will see that it has this in this nice format here. So you will see it has the packages, it has a double equal sign, and the very specific package it's installed to. You should do this for every single one of your projects. Again, it's right there in the assignment. You will see I will be checking out and I'll change this from master to main. You need to be sure to include your requirements file, which has all the packages needed for the install. And you will use that doing the pip freeze that we talked about before. All right. So that's your command. The command you will run is pip freeze greater than requirements.txt. That will automatically generate this requirements.txt. If you install extra packages while you're working on your project, you must come back and regenerate this file. So go to pip freeze and send requirements, and it will overwrite the file with the updates. So again, this is one of the last things you do. Once your project's up and running, everything's going great. You come in here, you generate your requirements.txt, right? You commit that file, then you go to your README requirements and you start building out your README file before you actually submit the project to me. Okay. That way, when I see your project, I say, oh, I need to go install the requirements file. I bump out here after I've created a interpreter, and I can go ahead and install all your packages that are necessary for your project. Anybody have any questions on the pip requirements part? Okay. So again, you'll notice in homework assignments, this is worth a lot of points, the stuff I just covered, right? That's 50 points. That's half the homework assignment, 40 points, is making sure that you have the commits on your project, that you have your requirements file set up correctly, and that your README file is written correctly with all the requirements in it. So really, really focus on this in the beginning because it's worth a lot of points. It's also worth a lot of points as we get down to the final project as well. So we have those new changes. We have this requirements file and we updated our README. Let's go ahead and push those changes out. So let's go to Git and commit. And what will happen here is you'll notice you have this new section here called unversioned files. This is where we can click our requirements file, telling them that we want to upload this file as well. So in our comments, we will say something like updated the README for pip install instructions. And then you could say added requirements.txt for package installation. Okay, it doesn't matter what you put here, but the more descriptive you are, the more it's going to help you remember what you did in that particular commit. Remember, we go down here to the down arrow and select commit and push. For this example, I'm going to show you if you forgot how to do that, what would happen. So we're going to click commit. And we'll see it's committing. And we can see it's committed, right? And if I come out here to my GitHub repo and I refresh, and you're going, I don't understand. My changes aren't here, right? We still have pip web browser. We do not have a requirements.txt file. You probably have committed maybe once, maybe multiple times on your side, but you forgot to push it up to the server. So we will go to Git and then you go to push. And in Git push, we can now go ahead and push all those changes up. So it's not a big deal if you forget the drop down. You just have to do the extra step to go in and push it automatically. If you click commit and push, it automatically does that step for you so you don't forget. I encourage you to always push to the server. We've had this multiple times and I've explained this to students. If you just commit locally, that's fine. The problem is if you never push that to the repo and something happens to your laptop, you lose all your code, right? Say your hard drive fails or something like that. Sounds improbable. It's happened every semester that I've taught this class. Somehow somebody lost their code. Their laptop died or something happened, whatever it is, or their laptop died and they wanted to use it on their desktop, but they didn't commit their code. If you always commit and push out here to your repo and we refresh, we will now see requirements.txt and our README changed. Now I could come out here and recheck this out on another computer and keep working on my code. So it gives you a ton of flexibility in doing this. Use it, make sure you commit often and you push often out to the GitHub. If you guys are having problems on your GitHub or on your code, right, and you want me to take a look at it, instead of sending me files and things like that, which is a little more difficult, it's much easier if you get this repo up and push it up, even though the files are broken, push it up so that all I have to do is you, in your email, you send me this URL. Now look right now, you'll notice it has the URL with a tree main. Don't send me this tree main stuff. It actually causes problems. Just click on your main project here, then grab this URL and email that to me. That way I can check out your code and take a look and see what's going on. And I can give you some feedback in an email if you got issues. All right. Let's see here. What else did I want to do and cover on that project? I think that's it until we get rolling here next week. If, for example, we wanted to create a Python file in here, we could right click on our project name up here at the top, new, and go to Python file. And in this Python file, we could say, call this our main.py for now. And this is where we'd add that. When you create a new file, it's going to ask, do you want to add this to your Git repository? In this case, we do, right? This is a Python file. We want to add that. So the moment I hit add, now it's going to turn green. And what green indicates is that this is a new file and that we're committing this to the repository. So you have lots of different colors. You have white, which means this is the same thing that matches on the repository. You have blue, which means there's changes made in this file. You have red, which means this is a new file, but we're not committing it. And then you have green, which means it's a new file and we are committing it. Okay. You don't have to memorize those, but it helps you remember what those colors means while you're over here at the top. So say we were doing a Python project or stuff over here. If it's just a Python file and we're not actually using a framework like Streamlit, Flask, Django, if it's just a single Python file, you need to make sure you put your name and stuff on that. So you come back out here to the learning modules section and you will copy and paste this part into that file. Something like this. Obviously, put your name in here and whatever project you're doing. Miniproject1, etc. will just be a single file. And then you have all your code. And then once you're all done, let's go ahead and commit that. Commit. And this is going to be added main.py. And we'll commit and push. And push it out to the server. And that went correct. We go out here and we refresh. And you'll notice we have a main.py file out here. Again, you can always click on these files out here and you can take a look at the code and I can read through it. And a lot of times I can go through and do the same thing. I can read through your code and find an issue, or I can look at the raw file and download it, pull it down, that kind of stuff. So really handy. Right now, we're just going to be dealing in these flat files that you see over here, as well as Python files. Eventually, we'll have HTML files, CSS, folder structure, all sorts of stuff in there. So that will change some things that we'll do on this side. But the Git commit process, everything's always the same. And I highly encourage you to create them on GitHub first, then bring them into PyCharm. Make sure you create your interpreter as the next step, and then you can begin coding anything in your project. All right. Anybody got any questions on this part? It's a quiet crowd today. All right. So this video I'll upload to that section so you guys can reference that. I'll go ahead and stop it here.